Hello， 大家好，欢迎来到我的频道。Today we'll be installing the BC Racing BR Series coilover on my BMW E91 wagon. This video is not sponsored by BC Racing. Ever since I bought this wagon, I have always wanted to make it my first project car, and no project car is completed without a set of coilovers. So with the coilovers, I'm actually not looking for performance gains or extreme lowering of the car. At least those are not my primary goals. The car will probably never see a track day, you'll probably see a couple autocrosses. I just wanted to gain some experience about modifying cars, and any performance gain or lowering will just be added benefit. For the E91 wagon, looking for a set of coilovers is actually pretty difficult because the wagon platform is generally speaking less supported by the aftermarket manufacturers. And as far as I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, for any BMW E90 series, that including E90s, E91s, E92s, and E93s, the all-wheel drive platform and the rear-wheel drive platform require completely different suspension setup. However, within each platform, meaning all-wheel drive, E90, E91, E92, E93s, versus rear-wheel drive, E90, E91, E92, E93s, the suspension is generally interchangeable with one catch. And the catch being for wagon and convertible models, those cars are more rear-heavy, so the rear axle will require higher suspension rates. And I have researched the suspension rates on and on and on. I couldn't find a definitive conclusion. By default, the BC Racing BR Series suspension have 6K front spring rate and 12K rear spring rate. I also researched a couple other brands such as ST, KW, Bilstein, and Fortune Auto. And the Fortune Auto coilovers by default have a 8K front springs and 11K rear springs. So when you put the weight of the car on a suspension with a lower spring rate, that spring will compress more, or in other words, the car will sit lower. However, with coilovers, since they are height adjustable, there's less of a worry. Another effect that different spring rates have is that traction generally decreases as the spring rate increases. So for example, if you have a higher spring rate in the rear and a lower spring rate in the front, the car in theory will tend to oversteer. Obviously, any spring in a specific suspension setup will have its own motion ratio, so you cannot just directly compare the numbers front to rear. But the general relation between traction and the spring rate is true. Now again, I don't have a specific reason why I chose the 6K front, 12K rear, other than that it's the default from BC Racing. Will that make a difference on track? Absolutely yes. Will that make a difference on the road? Probably not. So without further ado, let's unbox the coilovers. Some extenders for the rear coilover, because otherwise they can be quite hidden and inaccessible. The front coilover with camber plate. Looks like rear spring and rear shock. Before we get to the fun part, I think I'm gonna go remove the rear interior panels. I've heard that they are quite difficult to remove. I think I need to disconnect the 12-volt outlet here. That's a T20 screw here. There's a T40 screw there. There's two T25s there. Next time we need to remove this cover here, but from what I saw on YouTube, there's a couple clips that's very difficult to remove. So here are the two clips that hold this panel to the body. As you can see, these are double clips, so you need to push them in opposite directions simultaneously in order to remove them, and honestly I don't know how that's going to be achievable, so it's very likely that you'll break one of the... I somehow managed to get this one out intact. After you push the panel up, you can create a gap which will give you access to one of the screws that's holding the liner in place. You do not need to fully remove the liner, although you can if you want to, but I didn't want to risk breaking any more tabs. And that is the access to the shock tower. And removing the panel on the other side is exactly the same process. To remove the strut tower brace, the proper way to do it is to remove all the panels that's above the engine. I have done it a couple times and it's not difficult, it's just takes a lot of time to remove all of them. So I'm gonna see if I can take the strut tower bar out from underneath here. Taking it out shouldn't be a problem, but I'm gonna see if I can slide it in during installation. And if I can do that, then that will save me a lot of time. The two bolts on the side are E14 Torx. And the one in the center is a E18 Torx. I just loosened the bolt in the center but didn't remove it. That should allow me to slide the strut tower brace out. Well, it turns out I can't fully slide out the strut tower brace, but I can wiggle it from side to side to give me access to the three mounting bolts. So it looks like in order to remove the strut, that is the brake fluid hose, which is connected to this mounting bracket, which is connected to the wheel knuckle. And on this side, the two wires are for the wheel speed sensor and the brake pad wire sensor. Those are connected to the same bracket, and that is a stabilizer bar link which is connected to the strut. And this is the other end of the nut that secures the stabilizer bar link. It seems that this entire bracket is connected to the wheel knuckle by this nut and bolt, which is also what's holding the strut in place. So I don't think I need to disconnect the brake line and the sensor clips. The nut that's holding the stabilizer bar link is 16mm. There is a thin flange on the other side of the stabilizer bar link, so I need to hold that in order to remove the nut. Okay, I hope it's not 16mm like the nut is, because I have a 15mm open end wrench and a 17mm open end wrench, but not 16mm. Alright, 17mm did the job. Now we're going to try to remove the nut and bolt that hold the strut onto the knuckle. That is an 18mm nut and 18mm bolt on the other side. Depending on the age of the car, it can be relatively seized on there. I tried it yesterday, I couldn't remove it, so I sprayed it with some penetrating oil, let it sit overnight, and it seems that now I can remove it. Whew. Now I should be able to move the mounting bracket out of the way. Now we need to remove the 3 bolts that holding the shock onto the shock tower. Those are 13mm bolts. Now this is the only bolt holding the shock body onto the shock tower, so just be careful when removing that. It's better to just hold your hand underneath here, catch it, and also I have a jack under there just in case it falls. Okay, I managed to pull the shock out. It's pretty difficult to get it out. So there are 2 ways to make it easier. The first one is just loosen the bolt on the lower control arm there and there. That will allow the control arm to swing down a little bit further. And the second way to do that is to use a spring compressor. I'll definitely do that for the other side, since I don't really want to mess with the 2 lower control arm bolts. I actually tried, they are pretty tight. I wasn't able to loosen them at all. I'm sure if the car is in the air or if you really want it, you can, but not worth the effort. And definitely mask off the fender. I think actually 1 layer of masking tape is not enough. Probably use 2 layers or something. And after that, just pull the shock out. So depending on your car, the pinch bolt area here, even after you remove the bolt, it may still pinch the strut pretty hard. So there is actually a specialty tool to open the gap. I didn't need to do that. Some people just use a chisel or a screwdriver to open the gap up. It's not recommended, but since I haven't tried it, I don't know how bad it will be. Another method people use is using a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch adapter. Jam the adapter in there, turn it 45 degrees. That's another potential way to try, but luckily I don't need to try any of those. Alright, here is a weight comparison. Stock shock, 12.2 pounds. BC Racing BR Series shock, also exactly 12.2 pounds. That's a little surprising. I was expecting the coilover to be a little bit lighter. And here is a comparison of the stock shock versus the coilover. You can see that the coilover is physically shorter. Then lastly, here is a comparison of the diameter of the shock body. So the coilover is 5.42 centimeters, and the stock coilover diameter is 5.28 or maybe 5.27 centimeters. So the coilover is marginally larger diameter, but I don't think that will affect the wheel clearance by any means. And also the spring, you can see the diameter of the spring is actually smaller than that of the stock. So, but when installing the car, I believe the wheel will sit somewhat at this level, so the spring diameter is kind of irrelevant when we are talking about wheel clearance. Now I'm gonna try to install the coilover. All the coilovers come preloaded from the factory, and we can adjust its height after we install. So I'm not too worried about the height right now. From the factory, there is a paper gasket on top of the shock tower. It's not really necessary. It helps reduce down noise and vibration. So I have put that on order. I have in fact also put on order the new hardware. They are steel bolts, so theoretically you should be able to reuse them. However, the Bentley manual does specify replace them with new bolts. Alright, that's it. One shock installed. Having a spring compressor definitely made removing the spring much easier. Okay, now time to install the wheel and hope it doesn't rub. Okay, this is how it looks like with the wheel installed at the default setting. I think it's too low for my liking, so I'm actually gonna raise a little bit. Also, I'm not sure if it rubs in the default setting, so I'm gonna get my scope camera out and verify if it rubs. In order to adjust the height of the coilover, first loosen this ring here using this tool. Just watch out when you do that because this tool has a nickname knuckle breaker or something like that. It has a tendency to slip. Alright, with that loosened, we should be able to grab the entire shock body and rotate it. It's much easier to take the medium wrench, grab onto the lower collar, twist it to raise it. Because the direction that you twist the medial collar when raising the coilover is to tighten it, there is no concern of accidentally loosening something. On the other hand, if you are trying to lower the coilover, you can take the largest wrench, grab on the top collar, twist it to lower it, and because the direction is tightening the larger collar, there is no worry of loosening anything by accident either. Now we just need to tighten the lock collar and we should be good to go. As you can see, the clearance between the shock body and the tire is pretty tight. It's less than the width of a finger. But the tire doesn't rub, so all is good to go. Next, we're gonna remove the top of the rear shock mount. It's a 6mm Allen and a 16mm nut. Next, we're going to remove the 17mm nut for the lower mount. I already cracked it loose. Next, use a jack to jack up the suspension to release the force on the spring. Then remove the 21mm nut and bolt. Alright. Next we can remove the spring. It's not held by any nuts or bolts or anything. It's just held in place by spring tension. I use a spring compressor to help me remove it, but there really isn't any force, or there really isn't too much force on the spring compressor at all. So that's why I'm only using one of them instead of two. That's the lower spring mount. You need to remove this as well. Alright, this is the new spring setup. It got a rubber seat, and then the spring sits on top of that. Then sits on top of that is the adjustable perch, and then sit on that is another rubber gasket. Then lastly, there is these optional spacers. You don't have to use them, But if you choose to, it basically goes in between the spring and the rubber gasket like this. Alright, in order to assemble the shock, this is how the shock come out of the box. You need to remove the top nut and then remove this washer. And this is what comes off of the old shock. So there is a rubber boot here. If you didn't see this, check the car. It may have been stuck on the car. And then underneath the rubber boot, there is another insulator with a sleeve. And finally, a metal cap. So we are not gonna use the metal cap, so put that back. We are gonna reuse the rubber insulator, but without the metal insert. So take the metal insert out, put it back, and then put the rubber insulator on top of the new shock, like this. And then lastly, I've got a new rubber boot to replace the old one. So that goes on top of this. The new shock also comes with a new nut for the bottom. I don't think that's compatible with the old nut either. So next, we're going to reinstall the bolt that secures the lower control arm onto the wheel hub. The torque spec is 165 millimeters or 122 foot-pounds. Next, we are going to tighten the 17 millimeter nut for the shock absorber lower nut. Is tightened to 38 Newton meters or 28 foot-pounds. Alright, the new nut that comes with the BC Racing shock absorber is 16 millimeter instead of 17, which is the OE. This has happened to me a couple times now. The fasteners coming with the BC Racing is a different size than the OE, and that always catches me off guard. Remember this that we took out from inside the car? This is supposed to go on top of here, but the nut is a different size, so we actually can't use this. What you need to do is to cut off the rubber insulator, put the rubber insulator on top of this, and then put this washer on top of the rubber insulator, and then use the nut that comes with the shock. Okay, now this is the new rubber bushing that I ordered. It's a shame that I need to cut it off, brand new part, but this is actually OEM, not OE, so don't feel too bad about it. Alright, now put this on. Right, and this, and then this. And that's tightened to 37 Newton meters or 27.2 foot-pounds. Yeah, I think I'm gonna strip out the island if I keep going. Well, that's the best I can do now. I can't get it torqued to spec because I'll strip out the island if I do so. Okay, lastly, we're gonna install the adjusters. And then there is a sleeve nut. In order to adjust the rear ride height, use the medium wrench, spin up the top collar on the spring perch like this. And then after that, you'll be able to use the large wrench, spring up the lower collar in the same direction. That will basically eat up the space here. In order to install the extension, loosen the screw here. And just put it on top of it. And then tighten the screw. If you are willing to sacrifice the grocery hook, on the wagon at least, if you don't need that, you can remove this and use this hole for the extension. But I do like my grocery hook, so. Make sure you install the inside half of the hook, whatever. Make sure you install the inside half of that before you install the cover. The last thing to pay attention to when putting the suspension back together is the sensor for the auto leveling, or the auto leveling feature for the auto headlight. There are two sensors, one on the front, one on the rear. Both of them are on the driver's side. So here on the front suspension, you can kind of see there is a link that's attached to this lower control arm. And then it kind of goes back and then goes up, and then you can see right there is the swing arm for the sensor. Let me see if I can find a better angle. Here is the sensor itself. Just pay attention to the orientation of the swing arm. And moving on to the rear suspension, you can see another sensor. Right now it kind of have a shadow on it. That's the sensor. That's also attached to the lower control arm via a link. Just pay attention to the orientation of the link, the direction, how it bends. I heard it's a common mistake that when putting back together, bent it to the wrong direction, and then the auto leveling feature won't work anymore. It shouldn't affect the auto leveling feature just by lowering the car if you lower the front and rear by the same amount, because the auto leveling feature is really kicks in when the front and rear ride height differs. Alright guys, so that's it for today's video. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with how it turned out in terms of aesthetics. So until next time, happy DIYing, 我们下期再见。